can see my PowerPoint presentation, and you see somebody madly typing next to a cup of coffee on their laptop. Maybe not madly. Let's set the scene. There's a speech or presentation you want to deliver. It's an important one. Maybe it's for work. Maybe it's at a Toastmasters event. In any event, you write and compose your speech. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my cursor. And I found the cursed cursor. Not only have you written your speech, but you've practiced it. You've looked at yourself in the mirror. You've got your body language. You've actually practiced with friends. You've gotten friends, co-workers, perhaps other Toastmasters to give you feedback on your speech and give you points for improvement in addition to the things that you're doing well and should keep doing. Wherever the venue is, if it's a live venue where you're giving a speech, you're going to do a testing of your audiovisual equipment, such as your LCD projector, your microphone. Perhaps you'll check out the stage and make sure that where you're standing on the stage isn't going to interfere with what people see. And maybe you channel your inner Steve Jobs and bring props to your event to demonstrate your point and blow your audience away. You deck out in your best. His first name is Ryan. His last name escapes me. It's not Gosling.
Reynolds.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Ryan Reynolds. You channel your inner Ryan Reynolds and come dressed in your best. And of course, to make sure that your throat stays in perfect condition, or the best condition it can, while you deliver perhaps a long speech or speech of some length, your bottle of water. Or if you really find that too plain, maybe just put some lime electrolyte Mio in there, and it becomes a beautiful way to soothe your throat as you present. So in a sense, you've got all your ducks in a row lined up. It's coming to the not the closing, but the opening. You look out at the audience through the curtain, or perhaps you've been sitting in the audience, and you know within a couple of minutes, it's your time to go up to the podium and or stage. But this is how you feel. You have that last minute jitterness and nervousness. Perhaps it's almost a freaking out of sorts. And you look and feel like this gentleman. But this is not the gentleman you want to see go out on stage. This is the gentleman you want to be to come out on stage. You want to look confident. You want to look ready and prepared. So how is it that you can transition from being in a state of hyper arousal where your mind is spinning, you've got that fight or flight or freeze response going on, and into the image of you that is calm and in control? And there are basically 4 techniques I'm going to share with you today, 4 tools that you may consider to use to help you bring yourself from a state of anxiousness to a state of calm control. You can see that I have a toolkit there. Different people use different tools and can still accomplish the same purpose. You also see that I have a first aid kit there. This set of tools that I'm going to discuss today are not the only tools that you can use, but these are 4 different tools that I'm going to encourage you to explore and learn about even after this presentation. The document that I put in the chat has a list of references to videos, books, articles that you can read on these techniques or these tools. I actually call them our RBIT tools, which stands for, in Albert's acronym world, right before it's time. So these you have in your back pocket if you need them, if even after all that preparation, you're still in a place where you need to calm down and get your mind in full control. I came up with this really snappy title, Master Your Last Minute Jitters to Deliver the Goods. And that's essentially what this presentation is going to be. In a sense, it's going to be the psychology of stage fright with an emphasis on those last minute tools that you can use in real time to get yourself in a place where you're ready to deliver with confidence and style in the Ryan Reynolds confidently dressed way. So why is it that we have stage fright? Or why is it that we're afraid of public speaking? To a lot of people, you're stepping out in an audience, and you're not stepping out in an audience. It doesn't feel like you're stepping out to an audience of people that are there to support you. It feels like you're stepping out to an audience of people that are ready to pounce on you or make fun of you or whatever. This irrational fear comes over you, and it's not a bad. Could I ask everybody to mute their cells? Thank you. In a sense, when you go out and you're delivering and putting yourself in the focus of attention, in a sense, what you're doing is you're tapping into a predatory fear that's been hardwired into you. It's a hardwired fear that has been adaptive. If you're in a situation where you need to fight, you need to run away to avoid being eaten, or you need to stop and find out what's going on in your environment. It's a survival mechanism. It's not a bad thing, but when that survival mechanism kicks into full gear, when we're about to go out and speak to a group of people, not wolves, that's when it can become an issue. A lot of people feel singled out and vulnerable when they go out onto that stage. Other reasons people do have performance anxiety are there's that fear of rejection or being laughed at, especially if you don't have a lot of experience in public speaking, or you haven't spoken to as large a group as you're about to speak to. A fear of judgment, especially if it's a group of people that you don't know as well as you would like, or that you feel are elevated in terms of their education. So it's very easy to get self-conscious. You may also worry about your reputation, particularly if the performance you're going to do is a sales presentation for a client in front of your boss, or it's a job interview for a position that is your dream job. So you worry about what people are going to think about you and how your performance might impact your reputation. Lastly, second lastly, for a number of people, there are emotional triggers associated with getting up and speaking in front of people. There could be past unresolved traumas. Perhaps a teacher or other students, when you did a presentation in school, made you feel inadequate, and trying to confront that fear is still triggering and brings back those memories. It's interesting, there are a lot of therapies that people can do to overcome trauma. They actually have a new virtual reality therapy where you can put glasses over your eyes and actually see a virtual audience. And a therapist can make the audience receptive or make the audience look bored or nasty. So they can actually help you gradually acclimatize to different types of audiences. So although Toastmasters is the solution we certainly actively promote, it's one of the cheap ones, certainly not the only one. The last reason for performance anxiety is lack of preparation. So it's very important that You know what you're going to say, that you practiced it, and that you have done the research and the confidence so that you can give that presentation without losing your place easily. I'm going to come up with a term, the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is a part of your brain. It's an almond-shaped part of your brain, which is involved in the fear response. When amygdala hijack means that when something has happened and that fight, flight, or freeze response that the amygdala is involved in actually hijacks or predominates over your rational thinking mind, your prefrontal cortex of your brain. You can see as this poor person is wiping the perspiration from his face as he steps up to the microphone that he is indeed experiencing an amygdala hijack. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Broadcast News. Anybody raise your hands if you've seen it? Broadcast News. There was actor Albert Brooks. He's a reporter, but he has to go and do an actual anchor spot. He's not used to anchoring. He sweats so much, he wears a dark blue shirt that they have to come and dry him with an air dryer between takes. And people are actually calling on air asking, is he okay? So he certainly experienced that amygdala hijack. So essentially, as I've said, it's when your flight, fight, or freeze response overrides your rational thinking or your rational response. In a sense, your feeling or your middle part of your brain or the limbic brain is cut off from the prefrontal cortex or the higher cognitive executive function part of your brain. How do you know that you are experiencing an amygdala hijack? This gentleman is experiencing one. Obviously, it's an emotional outburst. Some go into fight mode and they say or do things that are considered unprofessional or kind of like taking a huge hammer for a very small nail. The response doesn't match up with the stimulus. Inappropriate reactive comments, perhaps an email or voicemail message, emotional outbursts. These are all amygdala hijacks. When your rational mind is no longer in control, your mid-limbic center mind is in control. And when these amygdala hijacks happen, it usually doesn't take too long after it's happened that you regret it. And unfortunately, you can't unring a bell and you can't unjack an amygdala hijack. Obviously, if you're going to go step out to an audience and give a speech and deliver a presentation, you can't predict exactly what's going to happen. You may have a very receptive audience. You may not have a receptive audience. I actually saw at the Toastmasters International Convention, one of the key speakers was blown away by how little the audience would respond. And I could tell that he was experiencing a bit of distress at that. Kept his cool. He stayed professional, even though he wasn't able to get that audience attention that he wanted. In other words, he kept his prefrontal cortex in control over those emotions and reactive tendencies of an amygdala hijack. So what I want to do for the first bit is to delve a bit into the biology of the nervous system, to give you a little bit of a glimpse into the emotional hardware and physiological hardware that we have that can be involved in this fight, flight, or freeze response. This isn't a real brain. This is an illustration of a brain that is labeled in such a way to make the different parts easier to see. These are certainly not all the features of the brain, but these are the ones that I'm going to talk about that are involved in this response. And I'm simply going to highlight each one as I introduce its purpose. Think of me as your real estate agent that is taking you around on a tour of the nervous system. We start with the thalamus. And the thalamus is this circular it's actually spherical. It's a three-dimensional structure. We actually have two of them. We have one on each side in the middle of our head, just like we have two cerebral cortices. We have two thalami. The thalamus is essentially the transmission center where nervous impulses about what's out in the environment get to the thalamus, and the thalamus is the shuttle to the prefrontal cortex and also to the amygdala. The amygdala is the almond-shaped structure that is pictured here. We do have two amygdalae, one on each side, and this is involved in the fear response. Then we have what's called our hippocampus. It is actually Latin for inverted. It looks like an inverted seahorse. So hippocampus is actually Latin for seahorse. This structure is the one that is involved in containing our memories, particularly traumatic ones. And when the amygdala has easy access to that memory store, essentially the amygdala shares with the hippocampus the stimulation, and the hippocampus can identify if there's a match between a previous negative memory and what is happening. Next, we have our hypothalamus, which is a set of neural nuclei. The hypothalamus is one of the most important regulatory centers. It controls everything from thirst, hunger, sexual arousal, you name it. The hypothalamus has a hypo hand in it. Our pituitary gland is often called our master gland. It secretes a number of different hormones. One of the ones that we're going to talk about that helps to stimulate the release of cortisol. And of course, there's our prefrontal cortex. That is our executive command center. I want to give you an example of the use of our prefrontal cortex. A little bit of an anecdote. I had a coworker who pinned every single certificate of recognition on her cubicle, all over. She came back from vacation. She said, I just got two more. She said, where am I going to put these? And I have to tell you, I had to press my lips together because I knew exactly where I wanted to tell her where to put them. But my prefrontal cortex said no, and I was saved. This is the thing that basically allows you to determine is what you're doing right or wrong. It allows you to rationally have control and discipline and make rational decisions. When it goes offline or temporarily offline, that's when we get our amygdala hijack happening. A little bit more biology. Our brain is, of course, connected to our spinal cord. Our brain and our spinal cord are referred to as our central nervous system. Just as the center in Inglewood, Colorado, world headquarters, is the central nervous system of Toastmasters. It controls how we think, move, learn, and feel. The spinal cord carries messages through its vast array of nerves between the brain and the rest of the body. So this is the central part of our nervous system. But those branches that we see there is the second form of nervous system that we're going to talk about. And that is the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral because these are the peripheral parts that go all over and innervate all the organs, cells, tissues of our body. Or PNS, which unfortunately sounds like another acronym, but if you say the N very clearly, it shouldn't be mistaken. These, of course, are the nerve fibers outside of the brain and the spinal cord. There's two types. We have what's called the somatic nervous system. So these are the nerves that sense what's going on in the environment, whether it be hearing, what we're touching, what we're seeing, what we're tasting. Those nerves relay that information to our brain and spinal cord. Those nerves are also involved in the actual contraction of our skeletal muscles, what we have voluntary control over. We also, I shouldn't say however, but we also have autonomic nervous system. And our autonomic nervous system is involved in involuntary muscle control, like our heart beating, which we shouldn't have to tell our heart to beat, it just does it on its own, and gland regulation. So autonomic nerves are important because they regulate and keep our body functions in control without us having to consciously control it. There's two types of autonomic nervous systems or nerves, and they are the sympathetic, not meaning sympathy, but basically meaning these are the nerves that are involved with the activation of the fight, flight, or freeze response. And then we also have the parasympathetic nerves. And those are the nerves that are involved in the more vegetative, relaxed functions where we don't have to worry about being eaten, where we feel safe and secure. Our sympathetic nervous system is basically what's involved in our fight or flight or freeze alertness response. It mobilizes our body to deal with danger. And the way it does this is by diverting more blood and oxygen to the brain and the muscles away from areas that don't require it as much when you need to fight or flight. Our parasympathetic nervous system is involved with the functions involved in rest and digest. So essentially our calmness response. The tools we're going to talk about to help us stop or prevent an amygdala hijack involve a repression of the sympathetic system and more of a promotion of the parasympathetic system so that we stay calm. The parasympathetic nervous system is involved in unconscious processes during rest, relaxation, or feeding. Heart breathing rate tends to go down, and blood is not diverted to the brain and the muscles. Blood can go to other regions of the body that are involved in the process of digestion, urination, and sexual arousal. Now that I've given you a little bit of a guided tour of the brain and the nervous system and the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, I want to talk about exactly what happens when we either are faced with a situation, a stimulus, or all of a sudden our mind, we're about to deliver a speech, we go into panic mode. We've looked at the audience, or we're getting very antsy. The first thing happens, the stimulus, maybe it's from outside, maybe it's something that we're imagining, but whatever event, a stimulus goes to our thalamus. Most all four of our senses, those stimuli are actually brought to the thalamus, and the thalamus will shuttle that signal to other parts of the brain. With the olfactory stimulus, that is with our nose, it goes directly to the amygdala. So our amygdala is activated. How? It confers with the hippocampus, which is our inverted seahorse. And there is a match between a memory of something threatening and what is currently happening. The triggering of the amygdala makes it send a signal to our hypothalamus, which are our group of neurons that in the control center of our body. What happens is the hypothalamus sends a signal through our sympathetic nerves, our fight or flight, that directly impact the adrenal glands that sit atop our kidneys. Those adrenal glands secrete adrenaline or noradrenaline. I should say actually both. Both chemicals have the same effects that involve the fight-flight response, physiological signs that we see in the body. So what kinds of things do we see when the amygdala is hijacked and adrenaline is released in our body? Well, our heart is beating more quickly, increased blood pressure. So basically going to our brain, our muscles, the things that are involved in the survival response. Of course, there's a more efficient breathing, a bit of a dilation of our nasal passages to facilitate that. We store glucose in a complicated form called glycogen. It actually gets released from our liver into glucose so that we have more sugar energy source running through our blood for the organs, the brain, the muscles that need it. And of course, the energy that is burned through this response raises our body temperature, and we end up sweating to sweat off some of that intense heat. Our pupils may also dilate so that we have more of a sense of our space and what is happening. Of course, we all know what the fear response indicators are. Your thoughts, they race. Your heart is thumping. Dry mouth because the blood is actually being diverted to other areas of the body. You're pale or flushed skin because the blood also is being diverted away from the surface of your skin to the organs that need it. Of course, the sweating to expend the heat, and butterflies, where the blood is diverted from your stomach muscles to other, or your stomach, your smooth muscles that line your stomach, or involuntary muscles to other, like the skeletal muscles, the brain. So you get that sense of butterflies. That's the initial fight, flight, or freeze response in physiological effect. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the thalamus doesn't just conduct signals of stimuli to the amygdala. It also shuttles it to the prefrontal cortex. Unfortunately, the prefrontal cortex doesn't come online as quickly as the amygdala can react, as the amygdala hijack process happens. But it does come online within 10 to 20 seconds. And with that executive functioning, it determines whether or not that stimulus is actually threatening or not. If it determines that the stimulus is threatening, it goes into a second process which will actually cause cortisol, another hormone that's involved in stress management, into our bloodstream. So the prefrontal cortex sends a signal to the hypothalamus that secretes a hormone known as a releasing factor into the blood. That releasing factor eventually ends up being received by the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland secretes a hormone called ACTH, adenocorticotrophic hormone. So adeno meaning the adrenal gland, cortical meaning the outside or the outer layer of the adrenal gland. Essentially, it causes the outer or the cortical region of the adrenal gland to secrete another stress hormone known as cortisol. And that basically allows us to keep the pedal down and keep the fight or flight response going, because we still have a danger that we need to overcome. In fact, when things happen in our lives and we get a sense of arousal, autonomic arousal, it's all on a continuum. So with the sympathetic nervous system, when it's more in control, you tend to be more panicked and stressed. When the sympathetic system is in control, you tend to be more toward that drowsy, sleepy type of state. So where your balance is determines what sensations, perceptions, thoughts, and actions actually occur. When it comes to stress or having demands that we have to deal with, there's actually a relationship between the demands that are put on us and how well we do. If the demands are low on us, we tend not to perform as well. But when we're given a demand like a deadline, expectations of others, then we tend to perform to a maximal part. If, however, the stress builds past that point, then we end up crashing in terms of our performance and it goes down. A, B, and C actually go with the three levels of arousal that I'm going to talk about that are involved in how we respond to stress. I call this our seesaw model of coping. So, what is a seesaw? You have a lever on a fulcrum, up and down. We can actually think of stress as three components of a seesaw. We've got demands that are sitting on one end of the seesaw, we've got resources on the other end, and then depending on how balanced that is, we have our operating state, how we feel inside. Hypoarousal is when we don't have quite enough arousal. So we're basically very low demands that are placed on us. And when I talk about demands, this could be everything from deadlines, commitments, things going wrong, relationship commitments, the things that our life needs from us, the things that we need to address. The resources are the things that we have to deal with those, whether it be organization, planning, meditation, social connections, the things that allow us, stress management techniques, things that allow us to deal with those demands. So in a hypoarousal or shut down state, essentially you have all the resources, but you don't have as many demands on you. It's best summarized by the Stick song, Too Much Time on My Hands. Then, of course, we have the hyperarousal, which is too much arousal. This would be characteristic of the amygdala hijack, our fight, flight, or freeze response, where we perceive that our demands outweigh our resources, that we don't have what it takes to meet the demands. That is the state that we sometimes find ourselves in when we're about to speak. The state we really want to be in is a state of balance or an optimal state, which some people call the window of tolerance. In the window of tolerance, the demands and the resources that you have to deal with them seem balanced. We feel more in control, we're calm, yet we're alert and we're able to act with our prefrontal cortex taking the lead to make us take rational action. So to summarize these three levels again, we have our fight, flight, or freeze, which is our hyperarousal. We have the hypoarousal, where our resources outweigh our demands and just there isn't enough to motivate us or keep us going. And then we have that window of tolerance. The last part of this presentation, I'm going to talk about, well, in fact, I've already talked a bit about the preparation strategies at the beginning. The Ryan Reynolds dressed up, test your equipment, rehearse your speech. Those preparation strategies will do help, but sometimes you need some last minute, right before it's time, or RBIT tools to get you back into that window of tolerance. The rest of this section, I'm going to explore I have 4 fingers. Well, I have 4 fingers up. The 4 types of tools that you may consider using. Warning, you may think some of this is a bit woo-woo. I will tell you that all the tools that I'm going to show you have been shown scientifically in research, supported by research. One tool involves breathing. The other tool involves the mind and movement. The third tool involves the mind, and the fourth tool just involves movement. It's best to have a variety of tools and find out which one works for you so that you can transform yourself from hyperarousal you to window of tolerance you. So when we go from trembling to trailblazing, there's actually 4 steps that I believe that we can take to become more confident in terms of speaking, overcome the fear. Engaging in growth mind practices is the first one. I'm not going to be talking about that in this presentation, but that's everything from nutrition, exercise, meditation, hot and cold exposure, things that allow your mindset to stay in a growth mode, in a resilience mode. Of course, writing your speech and selecting your props and rehearsing, polishing that speech. These are also important steps that will help you prepare and minimize the chances of an amygdala hijack before you speak. Of course, there's the final preparation, and that is the steps you take in the 24 hours, ironing your clothing, getting all your props in order. But the final preparation can also involve those things you do before the speech if your amygdala should hijack. That's what we're going to talk about here. The right before it's time tools. This is your emergency toolkit. The first one is breathwork exercises. We'll look at breathwork exercises that 3 different doctors recommend. Andrew Huberman, Wendy Suzuki, and Andrew Weil. Resource tapping, Dr. Laura Parnell. This is a form, tapping is a form of actual tapping, tap, 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 different parts going, alternating, and it's actually been shown to help alleviate symptoms of post-traumatic stress. We have a 5-second rule by Mel Robbins, who is a famous lawyer from CNN who now does her own podcast and is an inspiring motivational speaker. Fourthly, some of you may not have heard of this person. She has the 2nd most watched TED Talk on YouTube. Her name is Amy Cuddy. Power posing. So, I know we have 20 minutes left, but we'll make the best of the 20 minutes. I'm going to dig in. Please don't sigh when I tell you the physiological sigh is a really effective tool that you may choose to use when all of a sudden you feel your amygdala starting to take off on you. The physiological sigh wasn't discovered by this gentleman, but this gentleman talks about it a fair bit in his podcast. This is Dr. Andrew Huberman. He's a famous neuroscientist. Has anybody here heard of him? You have. He was on Jimmy Kimmel, just to give you a sense of how famous he's becoming. He's also becoming infamous as well because apparently he is very good at multitasking relationships. That's all. That's no judgment here per se. He's a wonderful scientist. His podcast is excellent, but he's not perfect. But he's quite motivational. So the physiological side is something that is highly promoted by Andrew Huberman to help people calm down in real time. Andrew Huberman, as I mentioned, he has a weekly podcast. It's called the Huberman Lab Podcast. I asked Toastmasters International actually I nominated him for a Golden Gavel nominee, but they decided they'll only stick with the one doctor of health. Dr. Joyce Brothers is their only Golden Gavel. So unfortunately, they didn't go for him this time, but the power of his ability to communicate has given him quite the audience and the fame. So his physiological side. This, of course, we're going to probably see in his book called Protocols, as you see here. This book hasn't even been released yet. It's being released in a year. It's already been published, but it hasn't been released. I suspect he is giving people time to get excited and pre-order. Andrew Huberman, how to do the physiological side is 3 steps. And I'll demonstrate them as I go through them. You inhale long through your nose until it's almost full. Then you inhale again quickly until full. So it's this way. And you're feeling the chest is full. So he calls this the double nose. And then you do a very long, slow exhale through your mouth. So it's a how does the physiological side help calm down in real time? Well, essentially, this is the basis. When you do the breathing in and almost you breathe in and then you do the extra inhale, you're blowing up, not blowing up, but you're pumping up your lungs to the maximum extent in terms of inflating your lungs with as much oxygen. At the same time, you're allowing your blood to offload as much carbon dioxide back to the air. But the second thing that's really interesting, when you breathe in, your cavity of your chest expands, right? Or I mean, when you breathe, it expands. But when you breathe out, your chest, your volume of your chest is actually compressed. That compression actually compresses the heart somewhat. What happens is when you make the heart a bit smaller than it was, volume-wise, the blood running through it runs at a slightly faster rate as the heart decreases and the blood is still running through it. Receptors in your heart actually converse with your limbic and your prefrontal cortex to generate a parasympathetic calming response that will actually slow your heart rate down. So by doing that low exhale, what you're doing is you're bringing in the parasympathetic response. You're helping give your prefrontal cortex some space to come back online in the same breath. Another form of breathing exercise that I learned about is used by, anybody guess what this team is? Navy SEALs. So these are the people in the United States that undergo incredibly rigorous training. And one of the skills that they're taught is box breathing. Box breathing is also very highly recommended by Wendy Suzuki, who is she studies neurology, but she studies the benefits of exercise on the brain in Brown University in New York. She also is a proponent of box breathing. Box breathing essentially is breathing out for a count of 4, or if we start at the bottom, breathing out for 4 seconds. So 2, 3, 2, 1. Then holding it for 4 seconds. Breathing in 4 seconds. and then repeating the process. So essentially, there's 4 seconds of holding your breath between 4 seconds of breathing in and 4 seconds of breathing out. The square breathing also helps to bring the sympathetic system more online and helps to bring your prefrontal cortex more in control. One other type of breathing that my therapist actually recommended me to do this is called 4-7-8 breathing. This is a type of breathing that Andrew Weil, this is a gentleman who wrote the book in the early 2000s, 8 Weeks to Optimum Health. He is still actively, he's in his mid-80s. He was on Miam Bialik's podcast very recently. He was one of the first professors to experiment with LSD at Harvard University, but he fell out with Timothy Leary and they obviously went different paths. His 8 Weeks to Optimum Health purports this type of breathing to help bring your back into a state of calm. Essentially, you breathe in for a count of 4. So, and then you hold it for 7 seconds. And then kind of like the physiological side, there's that for a count of 8. And you do this for at least 2 to 3 cycles. Andrew Weil has said that if you do this practice regularly, you will notice the benefits within a few weeks. So there are different breathing practices that you can use to help bring your prefrontal cortex back online. One size doesn't fit all, but it's very interesting how we underestimate how useful the breath can be to bring us back into a state of calm. Let's look at the next 3 techniques. The next one is the one called resource tapping, which some people, Andrew Huberman included, thought, okay, this can't help, but the research shows that in fact, it is another way to help cope and deal with traumatic memories and reduce anxiety. Resource tapping, one big proponent is Dr. Laurel Parnell, and she's an expert on a therapy that's called EMDR. EMDR was originally founded by Francis Shapiro in the late 80s when I was studying introductory psychology, so it hadn't yet been in my textbook. EMDR stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. Say that really quickly. EMDR is probably a little easier to say. So let's talk a little bit about what EMDR is. EMDR involves bilateral stimulation. So stimulating one side of your brain, then the other side of the brain, then another, then the first side, then the other side. So it's a back and forth stimulation. So it's a rhythmic right-left alternate hemisphere stimulation. It's been shown that this technique, and the way you do this bilateral stimulation can be a therapist holding their finger and you following with your eye back and forth. Could be a sound going back and forth, or could be tapping. This alternating right-left hemispheric stimulation helps a lot of people deal with and reprocess traumatic memories. So of course, you can do your eye tracking right or left. You can tap, so you can do the butterfly hug. But I'm also going to talk about how you can tap your hands and knees, or you can tap your toes. One toe, one toe, then the other toe, then the first toe again. So back and forth. I think you all recognize this gentleman, yes? He's here because not only did he actually show on live television him with his therapist practicing the bilateral stimulation, but he also liked one of my jokes I put on a Facebook post. So I think he deserves to be in this presentation as a result. Thank you, Andrew. So bilateral stimulation, or resource tapping, is a form of EMDR where you do it outside of a clinical setting. You visualize a positive resource, you sort of fixate on it, And then you do your tapping, you do your bilateral stimulation to strengthen that feeling and that positivity that comes with that resource. So it helps to activate your healing process to restore your balance and wholeness. As you can see here, tapping in, this is Laura Parnell's book, which is available from Sounds True Publishing in Colorado, a company devoted to spiritual and health, optimal health practices. So for instance, just to give you a sense of how stage fright tapping might work, you get an email from your boss that says in 3 days, you need to deliver a presentation to a group of people and sell this product. It's a little stressful. You're thinking about it. You're preparing for it. And you don't have as much experience in public speaking as you'd like. And all you can do is keep thinking about that teacher that you tried to present to that gave you a very disapproving look and shamed you because you didn't do as good a job as you thought or as you should have. Then you think to yourself, no, I'm going to put a thought in that's positive. So this is a memory of where you were coaching a group of students and got them to come out with an attitude and actually win the championship. So you feel that memory, you hear the voices, you hear the cheering, you feel the feelings, and then you strengthen them in with some tapping on your knees, 5 to 6 times. Tap some more if it feels good, and after the tapping, your anxiety will subside so that you're able to go out and to perform. So common tapping resources, things that you focus on before you tap. It could be a safe or peaceful place. For those of you who are in Halifax, this is Sullivan's Pond. So a place where you feel all your ducks and your geese are in a row. A nurturing figure, somebody who has been there to give you emotional and spiritual support. Maybe it's a protector figure, maybe it's a dog, maybe it's a superhero, a figure that was always there for you that you could count on. Or it could be an inner wisdom figure. And you don't necessarily need to know these people. I'm pretty sure that not everybody in the world knows the Dalai Lama, but here's a good example. So before you tap, you can choose a resource like a memory or one of these 4, a safe or peaceful place, a nurturing figure, protector figure, or an inner wisdom spiritual figure. And essentially, this is the technique. You find a comfortable place, you close your eyes, you breathe deeply, and then you visualize your resource as fully as possible, and you tap left, right, left, right, left, right. You can do it 6 to 12 times is her recommendation, and check in with yourself and see how it feels. There's some ways you can do this. Of course, the shoulders, the butterfly hugs. You can tap your hands on your thighs. You could even do your feet or hands or put your thumbs on the steering wheel. You've observed your arousal level and tap again if the positive sensations are there and you want to reinforce them even further. Something I learned after the fact of developing this is there are actually YouTube videos. If you type in bilateral stimulation music, BLS, bilateral stimulation, you can actually get music that taps. So it's like one sound back and forth in each ear. There's even videos that show a ball bouncing back and forth in the screen. So YouTube has a plethora of videos which also allow you to practice that bilateral stimulation. 4 minutes left and 2 to go, but we're almost there. 5-second rule. First thing I'm going to tell you, being a grammarian, I didn't name this rule because if I had, there'd be a dash between 5 and second, but that's okay. The 5-second rule was developed by Mel Robbins. Very popular figure these days. She too has a podcast, someone very relatable, and I've gotten some really positive messages from listening to her. Mel Robbins has come up with what's called the 5-second rule. She says the moment that you have the instinct to act on a goal, count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and do it. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 brings your prefrontal cortex online, and doing it means you don't end up talking yourself out of doing it. So it's sort of the, plug your nose before you jump into the water. The 5-second rule is to give yourself a 5-second count and just do it. Don't question, or your brain will stop you. Applying her 5-second rule to anxiety, she mentioned a time where she was going on an airplane and there was some turbulence in the airplane. She was on her way to Michigan to visit her mother, and she was raised in the shores of Lake Michigan, and she loved it, and she was looking forward to the trip. The turbulence in the plane was really difficult. She was starting to feel pretty stressed. So she had an anchor thought of her walking with her mother on the shore of Lake Michigan. That's her anchor thought. What she did was she counted from 5 to 1. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then she just thought about walking on the shores of Michigan, how it was going to be, how well she would love the trip. And then she would tell herself, reframe her fear, saying, I'm not afraid, I'm excited, I'm going to be going to Michigan. So instead of focusing on the fear, you reframe that to an excitement by focusing on the positive anchor thought. Just to apply this to public speaking, it's 2 minutes before you have to go out on stage. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to yourself. And then you think of an anchor thought. Your anchor thought is the audience, the message you're going to give that audience, the fact that that your audience is going to appreciate this message, that they're going to take it with them to help other people. So that's your anchor. Maybe it's also having some of the people involved, and they're there to support you, and you've got them in your anchor thought. And then you tell yourself, I'm excited. I'm doing something important and good. And you reframe it with that in mind and step out to the podium with that frame of mind. The last but not least, power posing. Has anybody here ever heard of power posing? Okay, Jenny says yes. Okay. This is something that I was taught in my job finding program. This was proposed by Amy Cuddy, who's got the second most watched TED Talk. She wrote a book called Presence in 2015 that talked about this power posing. Amy Cuddy was a Harvard psychologist. A social psychologist. She decided to resign. She didn't stay and get tenure because of some academic differences and bullying that was going on after she'd given her TED Talk. There were people that were directly challenging her study. And so she's written a book on bullying and bystanders, and it hasn't yet come out. It was supposed to come out this year. Still waiting for that to happen. But her power posing book is certainly out. And she talks about how when you change your posture for 1 to 2 minutes, you can change how your mind unfolds, your life unfolds. If you look at these two images, which one would you rather have as the doctor? The one on the left or the one on the right? Sherry, are you saying right or left? Left. Okay, yeah, the one on the left. You can see her verbals are more friendly and comforting. We do make instant judges from other people's body language, even if we don't hear them speak. Amy Cuddy was talking about how people could watch a 30-second soundless clip of physician-patient interactions and could actually predict the people they judged nicer had fewer lawsuits filed against them. So nonverbals are pretty powerful. People who feel powerful, like Mick Jagger and Oprah, there are different, power posing makes you feel expansive. So you take up space in what you're doing. You expand, you stretch out, and you lift your arms in a V, or you could lift your chin after winning, which we see a lot of Olympians doing. Unfortunately, that gentleman who knocked the pole vaulting off was not one of the ones. Unfortunately, he couldn't celebrate a win, although he was applauded for other attributes. Let's look at low power poses. So these are the poses where you make yourself small. You take up less space. You're hunched over. You're touching your neck to your hand to your head or your neck. So you're basically making yourself small. When you look at these poses, it's maybe even crossing your legs or folding your arms. It's obvious that you don't have that level of confidence. So those nonverbals speak pretty loudly. What's interesting though, although we know that others are influenced to make judgments about us based on our body language, our nonverbal body language, for instance, high power poses. You look at these people engaged in these expansive poses and they look confident, they look in control. And we look where they just make a couple of changes, contract their body posture, and we can see that it's a complete 180 as far as how confident they look. So others are influenced by our nonverbal body language, but can we be influenced by our nonverbal body language? And the answer is yes. Adopting poses, power poses, can actually make a significant effect of how you perform in an interview or another task that has a fair bit of stress with it. The research shows that people that hold their powerful poses for at least a minute perform better in mock job interviews, are more willing to take risks, have less anxiety, and feel more conscious and stronger than those that engage in the powerless or the low contracted body poses. For conclusion, our bodies change our minds. Our minds can change our behavior, and our behavior, of course, can affect our outcomes. And in this case, for the positive or the negative, depending on what type of power pose, what type of pose we adopt. So for instance, obviously we don't want to look like Wonder Woman in a job interview. We don't necessarily want to put our feet on the desk and kind of go like this. However, before that job interview, go and do this in the elevator, preferably by yourself, or in the bathroom stall, and do some power posing. Stand apart, expand your body, stretch out your arms, your feet. Do that for 1 to 2 minutes. Do it in private. And now go out and give it your all. Apply it. It's showtime. So the closing message about power posing is that your posture can help you move forward despite those feelings that you may not be good enough, that you're insecure about how well your performance is going to be. By adopting positive, powerful, expansive posture, you can influence the nonverbals that you communicate to others. Amy Cuddy's saying is to starfish up, where you spread out your arms. And she says you fake it until you become it. You do it again and again. You power pose before that complicated task, and you give yourself the resilience and the confidence to move forward. So just before we go to questions or comments, just to summarize, if you have prepared for a speech, but you're in a place where you're starting to freak out and the amygdala hijack is coming on, you have 4 techniques. You can use a breathing technique to help you bring that parasympathetic system online and bring your prefrontal cortex in more rational control. You can tap yourself to relief associated with a positive memory. You can count down to 5, fixate it on an anchor thought, and reframe your fear. or you can become a poser, a power poser, a private power poser before you go out and give it your all. I apologize. I know that's gone a little bit over time, but are there any questions or comments?
I have one. Albert, it's Sharon.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi,
Uh,
Sharon.
hi. I have done the power pose before, and I did it in a Toastmaster meeting before I went up. I was nervous, and it also it made me laugh because I felt so silly. I did it in the bathroom first, and then when they were just ready to introduce me, I got up. I was in the back of the room, but I stood there with my hands on my hip. So I didn't have my arms all the way out up, but on my hips. And anyway, but as I was just thinking of what I was doing in the bathroom, I started to laugh at myself. And that also helped, obviously, relieve some of the tension I felt too. So just thought I'd share that.
And not also bring levity to the room as well. Yeah. So you starfished up and chuckled up a little bit.
That's right.
I find the power posing really effective for job interviews, the few that have been given to me. It certainly does help. And I actually incorporate the power posing into the end of my exercise routine. I keep my arms up for a minute and I step back and forth. And I look at myself in the mirror. I'm not wearing a Wonder Woman costume, though. Everything but the costume. Thank you, Sharon. Anything else?
Albert, I just want to say thank you for introducing me to 3 new techniques. I'm going to try them out.
Perfect. The resource that I provide, that document, Sherry, also has videos and more just to get you started. For if you are like me, would like more information or actually hear a bit more about its effectiveness, they're certainly there. So yeah, I'm happy to hear that. If you do have any questions or you have any feedback for me or anything with respect to the document, you can send an email to me at D45 for District 45 Albert Cormier at gmail.com. That's me holding a mug that has shattered since this photo was taken. So this mug shot is a very precious one. So like the train, you have options to move forth on your track to the best you can be.